Maya thought she'd finally found her place among the city's elite charity circle, volunteering countless hours and pouring her heart into causes she believed in. But when the annual Spring Gala invitations went out, her name was conspicuously missing from the guest list. The rejection stung deeper than she expected, especially from women she'd considered friends. What happened next would expose the ugly truth about social hierarchies and reveal a secret that would change everything forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Riverside Community Center as Maya Rodriguez carefully arranged donation boxes along the folding tables. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the linoleum floor as she moved between stations, checking that each volunteer position had everything needed for another successful food drive. At 26, Maya had been coordinating charity events in her neighborhood for 3 years, but this was her first time working with the prestigious Willowbrook Women's Charitable Society. She discovered the organization through a flyer at the local library where she worked part-time. The society claimed to focus on community outreach and supporting underprivileged families, which aligned perfectly with Maya's passion for helping others. When she'd called their office 6 months ago, the receptionist had seemed surprised by her interest, but had grudgingly agreed to let her volunteer for their smaller events. Maya had thrown herself into the work with characteristic enthusiasm. She'd organized 3 successful coat drives, helped coordinate a back-to-school supply distribution, and spent countless weekends sorting donations in various church basements and community centers throughout the city. The other volunteers, mostly well-dressed women from the affluent Willowbrook district, had initially treated her with polite but distant courtesy. The first person to show her genuine warmth had been Charlotte Pemberton, a woman in her early 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive handbag that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent. Charlotte had complimented Maya's organizational skills during a particularly hectic toy drive before Christmas, saying she'd never seen someone coordinate so many volunteers with such efficiency. "You have a real gift for this," Charlotte had said, her manicured hand briefly touching Maya's shoulder. "We could use more people like you in our organization." Maya had felt a flutter of pride and belonging. Growing up in a small apartment above her mother's alterations shop, she'd always felt like an outsider looking in at the world of charity galas and society pages. Her mother, Elena, worked 16-hour days hemming dresses and taking in waists for customers who barely acknowledged her existence. Maya had learned early that hard work didn't always translate to recognition or respect. After that conversation with Charlotte, Maya had noticed subtle changes in how some of the other volunteers treated her. Rebecca Hartwell, the society's vice president, had actually asked for her opinion on venue selections for their spring fundraiser. Victoria Ashford had invited her to help with the silent auction planning. For the first time in her life, Maya felt like she might actually belong somewhere important. The validation meant everything to her. Maya had always been ambitious despite her circumstances, earning a scholarship to attend community college while working 2 jobs to help support her mother. She'd graduated with honors in nonprofit management, dreaming of one day running her own charitable foundation. Working with the Willowbrook Women's Charitable Society felt like her first real step toward that goal. Maya had even started dressing differently for their meetings, spending money she couldn't afford on a few nicer blouses and a pair of dress pants from the department store outlet. She'd practiced speaking in the refined way the other women did, softening her natural accent and carefully choosing her words. When Charlotte had mentioned that all the active volunteers would be invited to the Society's annual Spring Gala, Maya had felt a thrill of excitement unlike anything she'd experienced before. The Spring Gala was legendary in their city's social circles. Held at the Grand Rosewood Hotel, it attracted philanthropists, business leaders, and politicians from across the state. The tickets cost $500 each, far beyond Maya's budget, but Charlotte had assured her that dedicated volunteers would be guests of the organization. Maya had bought her first formal dress, a simple but elegant navy blue gown from a consignment shop, and had even splurged on professional alterations from a shop down the street from her mother's. She'd spent weeks planning what she would say to the various attendees, researching the causes they supported and the businesses they ran. This was her chance to network with people who could help her achieve her dreams of expanding her charitable work. She'd imagined meaningful conversations about community development and sustainable philanthropy, connections that could open doors she'd never dared approach before. The anticipation had carried her through another month of volunteer work. Maya had organized a successful winter clothing drive that collected over 2,000 items for local shelters. She'd coordinated with 3 different food banks to ensure efficient distribution of donations. She'd even recruited a dozen new volunteers from her neighborhood, people who couldn't afford to donate money, but were eager to contribute their time and energy. Rebecca Hartwell had seemed particularly impressed with Maya's ability to mobilize volunteers from diverse backgrounds. During their last planning meeting, she'd pulled Maya aside to thank her personally for bringing such fresh energy to their organization. Maya had walked home that evening feeling like she was exactly where she belonged, finally making the kind of impact she'd always dreamed of. But then the invitations went out. Maya first realized something was wrong when Charlotte avoided making eye contact during their weekly volunteer coordination meeting. The other women seemed unusually quiet, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever Maya approached. She'd attributed it to pre-event stress until she overheard Victoria and Rebecca discussing seating arrangements for the gala in the parking lot after the meeting. "I think we should put the Johnsons at table 6 with the Murdochs," Victoria was saying. And Charlotte specifically requested to sit near the Ashfords. Maya had approached them with a smile, ready to offer help with the logistics she'd become so good at managing. "Do you need assistance with the seating chart?" she'd asked. "I could create a spreadsheet to track dietary restrictions and conversation preferences." The silence that followed had been deafening. Victoria and Rebecca had exchanged a look that Maya couldn't quite interpret, something between embarrassment and annoyance. Rebecca had cleared her throat delicately and said, "That's very kind of you to offer, Maya, but we have everything under control." It was the way she'd said everything under control that made Maya's stomach drop. There was a finality to it, a dismissiveness that she'd never heard in Rebecca's voice before. Maya had pressed gently, asking about her own seating assignment, and had watched both women's faces transform into expressions of uncomfortable surprise. "Oh," Victoria had said softly, glancing at Rebecca for support. "Didn't Charlotte speak with you about this?" The conversation that followed had been a masterclass in polite cruelty. Rebecca had explained, with what Maya now recognized as practiced condescension, that the Spring Gala was a quote, rather exclusive affair with limited seating for their most established supporters. Maya's volunteer work had been invaluable, of course, but the gala was really intended for people who could make significant financial contributions to their causes. Maya had stood there in the parking lot, still holding the box of donated supplies she'd brought from her latest neighborhood canvass, trying to process what she was hearing. She'd asked about Charlotte's promise that active volunteers would be included, and had watched Victoria's perfectly lipsticked mouth form into a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think there may have been some miscommunication," Victoria had said. Charlotte probably meant that volunteers would be acknowledged at the event, not necessarily invited to attend. The ticket price alone is quite substantial, and then there are expectations about auction participation and future donation commitments. The message had been crystal clear. Maya didn't belong in their world, no matter how hard she worked or how much value she provided. She was useful for organizing their charity work, but she wasn't the kind of person they wanted representing their organization at their most important social event. The months of growing friendship and inclusion had been an illusion, a temporary tolerance that evaporated the moment it came time for the society's real purpose. Maya had driven home that evening with tears blurring her vision, the rejection hitting her harder than she'd expected. She genuinely believed she was building meaningful relationships with these women, that her dedication and competence had earned her a place in their circle. Instead, she discovered that all her efforts had been viewed as free labor from someone who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve her betters. The worst part had been calling her mother that night to explain why the dress they'd both been so excited about would go unworn. Elena Rodriguez had listened in silence as Maya described the conversation, and then had said quietly, "Mija, I could have told you this would happen. People like us, we're good enough to work for them, but never good enough to sit beside them." Maya had wanted to argue, to insist that it wasn't about class or money, but the words had died in her throat. Deep down, she'd known her mother was right. She'd spent months trying to transform herself into someone acceptable to the Willowbrook women, but it had never been about her qualifications or her character. It had been about the size of her bank account and the address on her driver's license. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The following weeks had been difficult. Maya had continued her volunteer work, but the joy had gone out of it. Charlotte had resumed being friendly, but Maya could now see the patronizing undertone in every interaction. Rebecca and Victoria treated her with the same polite professionalism they'd always shown, but Maya understood now that it would never evolve into genuine respect or friendship. She'd considered quitting the organization entirely, but something stubborn in her nature refused to give them the satisfaction. Maya had poured herself into organizing their largest food drive yet, coordinating with dozens of local businesses and recruiting over 50 volunteers from throughout the city. If they wanted to use her skills while excluding her from their social events, she'd make sure they got more value than they'd bargained for. The food drive had been a massive success, collecting enough donations to support 3 different food banks for an entire month. Local newspapers had covered the event, praising the Willowbrook Women's Charitable Society for their community outreach. Maya had watched Rebecca give interviews to reporters, taking credit for the organization and vision behind the drive, without mentioning the dozens of hours Maya had spent making it possible. Standing in the community center that morning, surrounded by the evidence of her hard work and dedication, Maya had felt a complex mixture of pride and resentment. She'd proven that she belonged in the world of serious philanthropy, but the women who controlled access to that world had made it clear that belonging was about more than competence or commitment. The Spring Gala was scheduled for the following Saturday evening. Maya had seen the Society's social media posts showing elegant table settings and preview photos of the auction items. She'd helped coordinate the donation of several pieces herself, reaching out to local artists and businesses who'd contributed beautiful items worth thousands of dollars. Her work would be essential to the event's success, but she'd be spending that evening at home, while the people she'd helped would celebrate without her. Maya had tried to tell herself that it didn't matter, that the real reward was in the work itself and the people they'd helped. But every time she passed the formal dress hanging in her closet, she felt the sharp sting of exclusion all over again. She'd been good enough to organize their charity work, to recruit their volunteers, to coordinate their logistics, but she wasn't good enough to be seen as their equal. What Maya didn't know, as she finished setting up for another successful volunteer event, was that her story was about to take a turn that would expose the true nature of the women who'd rejected her. The Willowbrook Women's Charitable Society was about to learn that their assumptions about Maya Rodriguez had been catastrophically wrong, and that their carefully constructed social hierarchy was built on a foundation far more fragile than they'd ever imagined. Maya stood in the empty community center, stacking the last of the folding chairs against the wall. The food drive had ended hours ago, but she'd volunteered to stay behind for cleanup, while the other volunteers rushed home to prepare for Saturday evening's festivities. Through the windows, she could see luxury cars pulling up to the Grand Rosewood Hotel across the street, depositing elegantly dressed guests for the Spring Gala she'd been excluded from. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Mija, are you sure you don't want to come have dinner with me tonight? I made your favorite enchiladas." Maya smiled, despite her melancholy mood. Elena Rodriguez had an uncanny ability to sense when her daughter needed comfort, even from across town. She was about to respond when her phone rang with an unknown number. Maya Rodriguez? The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, this is Maya." "This is Patricia Chen from the Grand Rosewood Hotel. I'm calling regarding tonight's charity gala. There seems to have been an oversight with your invitation." Maya's heart skipped. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake. I'm not attending the gala. According to our records, you should be receiving special recognition tonight for your volunteer coordination work. Could you please hold while I verify some information?" The line went quiet, leaving Maya confused and hopeful in equal measure. Perhaps Charlotte had arranged something after all, a last-minute gesture to acknowledge her contributions. She waited, watching more guests arrive at the hotel, their gowns glittering under the entrance lights. Patricia returned to the line, her tone now markedly different. "Ms. Rodriguez, I apologize for the confusion. Could you please come to the hotel immediately?" There's been a significant error regarding your involvement with tonight's event. I don't understand. What kind of error? I'd prefer to explain in person. Please ask for me at the front desk. And Ms. Rodriguez, you might want to bring formal attire if you have it available. Maya's hands trembled as she hung up. Nothing made sense, but something in Patricia's voice suggested this wasn't a cruel joke. She drove home quickly, grabbed her navy dress, and headed to the Grand Rosewood with a mixture of anxiety and bewilderment. The hotel lobby bustled with gala attendees sipping champagne and admiring the silent auction displays. Maya felt severely underdressed in her volunteer clothes, clutching her garment bag like a shield. At the front desk, she asked for Patricia Chen and was immediately escorted to a private office behind the concierge station. Patricia was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an expression of barely contained urgency. She gestured for Maya to sit before closing the door carefully. Ms. Rodriguez, I need to ask you something confidential. Are you related to Alexander Vega? Maya blinked in surprise. That's my father's name, but I haven't seen him since I was 8 years old. Why would you ask about him? Patricia's expression shifted to one of recognition mixed with concern. Because 30 minutes ago, Alexander Vega made a $2 million donation to tonight's charity auction, with specific instructions that all proceeds should be directed through your volunteer coordination programs. The room seemed to spin around Maya. That's impossible. My father disappeared when I was a child. My mother and I have been on our own for 18 years. Mr. Vega requested that I locate you immediately and ensure you're properly honored at tonight's event. He's apparently been monitoring your charitable work for some time. Patricia paused, studying Maya's shocked expression. He also mentioned that certain members of the organizing committee may have excluded you inappropriately. Maya felt like she was living in someone else's life. The father who'd abandoned her family, leaving them to struggle in poverty while her mother worked endless hours to keep them afloat, had somehow been watching her volunteer work. More impossibly, he'd made a donation larger than most people's lifetime earnings. I don't understand any of this, Maya whispered. Patricia's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with widening eyes. Ms. Rodriguez, you need to get changed immediately. Mr. Vega has just arrived at the hotel, and he's asking to see you before the evening's program begins. Maya's hands shook as she changed into her dress in the office's private bathroom. Her reflection showed a young woman who looked exactly like the child whose father had walked out, but nothing else about this situation resembled the life she'd known. When she emerged, Patricia was waiting with a hotel security officer. Mr. Vega is in the penthouse suite. He'd like to speak with you privately before joining the gala. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Maya's mind raced with questions and 18 years of suppressed anger. The security officer led her to ornate double doors and knocked gently. Come in. The voice was older, deeper, but unmistakably familiar. Maya stepped into a luxurious suite overlooking the city, and there he was. Alexander Vega looked exactly like she remembered, but aged, wearing an expensive tuxedo and an expression of nervous anticipation. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Maya. His voice broke slightly on her name. You look exactly like your mother did at your age. Why are you here? The words came out harder than she'd intended, carrying years of hurt and confusion. Alexander gestured to the seating area, but Maya remained standing. He sighed deeply before beginning to explain. I left because I thought I was protecting you and your mother. I'd made some business decisions that put powerful people's money at risk. There were threats, dangerous people who would have used you both to get to me. So you just disappeared? For 18 years? I rebuilt my life, made different choices, became successful in ways I'd never imagined possible. But I never stopped watching over you both. Your mother's shop, her customers, even some of the opportunities that came her way. I arranged those things from a distance. Maya felt her anger rising. We struggled. We went without things. Lived in that tiny apartment. Worked constantly just to survive. I know, and I'm sorry. I thought if I stayed away, you'd both be safer and eventually better off. But I've been watching your volunteer work, Maya. What you've built, the way you help people, the leader you've become, it's extraordinary. You don't get to be proud of me now. You weren't there. Alexander nodded, accepting her anger. You're right. I wasn't there, and that's my greatest regret. But I'm here now because I learned what happened with the Charity Society. How they treated you, excluded you despite everything you've contributed. How could you possibly know about that? I have resources now. Connections. When I heard that my daughter was being dismissed by people who should have been honoring her, I decided it was time to stop hiding. Maya stared at this stranger who shared her eyes and claimed to be her father. So the donation, that's what, guilt money? That's justice money. Those women judge worth based on bank accounts and social connections. Tonight, they're going to learn that they made a serious error in judgment. Before Maya could respond, Alexander's phone rang. He glanced at it and smiled grimly. The gala organizers would like to speak with me. Apparently, they're very interested in meeting their largest donor. Maya felt a mixture of vindication and uncertainty. Part of her wanted to see Rebecca and Victoria's faces when they realized their mistake, but another part felt like she was betraying something essential about herself by accepting help from the man who'd abandoned her. I don't want them to accept me just because of your money, she said quietly. They won't be accepting you, Maya. They'll be apologizing to you. There's a difference. 20 minutes later, Maya found herself in the hotel's executive conference room, facing the entire board of the Willowbrook Women's Charitable Society. Rebecca Hartwell sat at the head of the table, her usual composure replaced by obvious anxiety. Charlotte Pemberton kept glancing between Maya and Alexander with confused recognition. Victoria Ashford looked like she was attending her own funeral. Patricia Chen had arranged the meeting, explaining that Mr. Vega wanted to discuss his donation with the organizing committee before the evening's program began. What the women had expected was a standard meet and greet with a wealthy donor. What they got was a reckoning. Alexander spoke with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of powerful people. Ladies, I understand there was some confusion about my daughter's invitation to tonight's event. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya watched as understanding dawned on each woman's face. Rebecca was the first to find her voice. Mr. Vega, we had no idea that Maya was your daughter. If we had known about your family connection, of course she would have been included. That's exactly the problem, Alexander replied smoothly. My daughter's worth isn't determined by her relationship to me. She earned her place at this event through months of dedicated volunteer work that far exceeded anything the rest of your organization accomplished. Charlotte shifted uncomfortably. Maya has been a valuable volunteer, but the gala has certain social expectations. Social expectations? Alexander's tone grew colder. You mean the expectation that only people with money deserve recognition for charitable work? That's an interesting philosophy for a charitable organization. Maya found her voice. I don't want to be here because of who my father is. I wanted to be here because of the work I did, the programs I organized, the results I achieved. Victoria finally spoke. Maya, we never meant to exclude you personally. It's just that the gala has always been for our major donors and their families. And now I'm a major donor, Alexander said quietly, so we'll proceed as planned. Maya will be properly recognized tonight for her contributions, not as my daughter, but as the outstanding volunteer coordinator she is. Rebecca nodded quickly. Of course, absolutely. We'll make sure Maya receives full recognition. You'll do more than that, Alexander continued. You'll offer her the position of volunteer coordinator for the entire organization, with appropriate compensation and authority. And you'll make it clear to everyone present that her achievements earned this recognition. Maya stared at her father, then at the women who'd dismissed her so casually just days before. She realized this moment was about more than vindication or even opportunity. It was about choosing who she wanted to be going forward. I appreciate the gesture, Maya said slowly, but I don't want a position that's only being offered because you forced their hand. What I want is for organizations like this to recognize talent and dedication regardless of someone's background or bank account. She stood up, looking directly at each board member. I'll accept your recognition tonight, not because my father donated money, but because I earned it. And tomorrow, I'll be starting my own charitable foundation, one that values people for their contributions, not their connections. Alexander smiled with genuine pride. I'd like to be your first donor for that foundation. But this time, I'm not doing it from a distance. The gala that evening unfolded like a dream Maya had never dared to have. She was introduced as the volunteer coordinator, whose innovative programs had revolutionized the society's community outreach. The applause was thunderous, genuine, and entirely her own. Rebecca's speech praising her work sounded sincere, though Maya suspected it had been hastily rewritten in the last hour. But the real moment came when Maya took the microphone herself. Looking out at the room full of people who represented the social circle that had excluded her, she spoke about the importance of recognizing dedication over dollars, of measuring success by impact rather than income. Her words carried the authority of someone who had earned her place through merit, not birthright. After the event, Maya and Alexander sat in the hotel's quiet lounge, talking until dawn. 18 years of separation couldn't be erased in one conversation, but they began the difficult work of understanding each other. Alexander explained his business, his regrets, his pride in watching her succeed despite his absence. Maya shared her dreams, her struggles, her determination to build something meaningful. 3 months later, the Rodriguez Foundation held its first major fundraising event. Maya's mother, Elena, sat at the head table, beaming with pride, as her daughter addressed a room full of donors who had come to support their innovative approach to community development. Alexander sat nearby, no longer hiding his connection to his family, but clearly understanding that Maya's success was entirely her own achievement. The Willowbrook Women's Charitable Society continued their work, but with notable changes. Their new policies emphasize recognizing volunteers based on contribution rather than contribution ability to contribute financially. Rebecca Hartwell had personally apologized to Maya, acknowledging that their exclusion had been wrong regardless of any family connections that were later revealed. Maya never returned to work with their organization. She had learned that true belonging couldn't be granted by others. It had to be built through authentic relationships with people who valued the same things she did. Her foundation grew rapidly, attracting volunteers and donors who shared her vision of merit-based recognition and inclusive philanthropy. The navy dress she'd bought for a gala that had rejected her now hung in her office, a reminder that worth isn't determined by others' perceptions. Maya had discovered that real validation comes from staying true to your values, even when the world tries to convince you that you don't belong. Her father's intervention had opened doors, but Maya's character and competence had earned her the right to walk through them with her head held high. The women who had dismissed her learned that assumptions about people's backgrounds can be dangerously wrong, but more importantly, Maya learned that her value had never depended on their acceptance. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.